Welcome to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards. Stay tuned as we explore the latest resources, thoughts, and trends in workforce development. And now, here's your host, Ron Painter.
Welcome to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards from Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Ron Painter. We want to start off 2016 with a couple of quick conversations. Over the next couple of broadcasts, you're going to hear from some of the folks who work for congressional relations or lobbying for some organizations that deal with education. As we focus the early part of the year, a couple of broadcasts on the appropriations process. We're recording the day after the President's State of the Union, so I think it's appropriate that we take a quick look at some of what the President had to say. But let's go back and let me do a bird's eye view of what we see in the 2016 Omnibus bill that passed the House and Senate not too long ago. The list of what funding workforce boards are interested in continues to grow, from covering the Departments of Labor to the Department of Education to programs that are inside Health and Human Services and also the Department of Commerce. If we look at what's funded out of the Department of Labor, it looks like the Omnibus provides us levels that go back to pre-sequestration days. So we're looking at about $815 million for adults compared to $776. Although it's still below what was suggested in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which many of you know I call the I&O. The I&O suggested it should be funded at $825 million. So we're somewhat lower than that, but we are better than we were the year before. Dislocated workers show a rebound to $1 billion, $20 million, slightly below what the law suggested. But again, up. We're looking at youth funding going up to $873 million. The National Reserve remains steady. Workforce data is up a little bit from FY15. And we also see youth build get a little bit of a bump. Wagner-Pfizer, on the other hand, remains static with funding continuing. When we move over to the education side, what we're looking at with Pell is, again, a little bit of a bump in the mandatory funding for Pell. Again, reflecting the administration's focus on college. And in career and tech grants, we look like we're up a little bit. Adult basic literacy remains flat. I think we're looking for voc rehab to get a little bit of a bump. And CDBG, community development block grants and community services block grant funding, CSBG looks flat. CDBG looks like it is down a little bit. So you'll look in your mailbox for a larger or more in-depth interpretation of what we're seeing in the omnibus. But I think it's a good sign that we have an agreement, and the speaker has said that the appropriations process, will be handed over to the committees. So let's take a look at what the President had to say last night in the State of the Union, and then we're going to have to watch as the President delivers his actual budget to Congress. And if you remember, this is a process. The appropriations for the federal budget is a process. What kicks that process off is what happened last night, the President's State of the Union, and then he is going to deliver very thick binders to Congress around the President's or the administration's request. The President kicked off the State of the Union last night by talking about the economy, and one of the things that he pointed to was 14 million job gain over the last 2 years. As he indicated, the unemployment rate from when we looked at prior to the recession, or just prior, or in the midst of the recession, that number is in half. The president also indicated that the auto industry had its best year, and manufacturing has created 900,000 jobs. My commentary is that the president looks at national numbers, and I think all of us have to be cognizant of regional numbers, because as I travel the country, there are places that are experiencing worker shortage. Companies talk about the quality of the workforce, the depth of the workforce. I think there are other places that we could certainly use those jobs. As we continue to look around workforce and education issues, the president again called for Congress to work with him to make college affordable for every American. The president again reiterated that he wants to see 2 years of community college at no cost, in his words, for every responsible student, unquote. So the president again will push education, particularly it looks like community college and post-secondary. The president also came down, as he was talking about the economy, to look at what many of us understand is this cycle of creation and disruption of jobs. The president talked about the fact that he talked a little bit about health benefits. Then he turned his attention to say that, quote, say a hardworking American loses his job. We shouldn't just make sure he can get unemployment insurance. We should make sure that program encourages him to retrain for a business that's ready to hire him. If that new job doesn't pay as much, there should be a system of wage insurance in place so that he can still pay his bills. And even if he's going from job to job, he should still be able to save for retirement and take his savings with him. That's the way we make the new economy work better for everyone, unquote. And I think that certainly should ring a bell for us. I think it's part of the challenge as we look at the tools that are inside the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or the I&O. We should look at the tools that allow us to work with dislocated workers, but also incumbent worker training. I think many boards who haven't already ventured into incumbent worker training, I think it's one of the areas that we're going to need to explore. What does that look like? To whom does that apply? How do we develop policy, if you will, around what qualifies as incumbent worker training and what kind of companies in our local area? So that's a quick walk through the president's president's State of the Union address. He has no more inaugural addresses. This is the last State of the Union from the president. As you know, once we turn that calendar, the primaries are going to start. Iowa comes up shortly, New Hampshire to follow that. So we will, the next time we will hear an inaugural address or a State of the Union, it will be the new president that we elect in November. So stay tuned as we talk more about what's happening with appropriations, and we bring in some guests who really deal with this on their issues regarding education. This is Ron Painter for NAWB and Workforce Central. Today, as part of our series as we kick off 2016, is a look at some of the issues that Congress is going to be hopefully wrestling with. It's my pleasure to welcome Steve Voytek, who is the Government Relations Manager for the National Association of State Directors of Career and Technical Education. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks for having us today.
It's great to see you. I appreciate the conversations that you and I get to have on the education issue. It's important to us in workforce development, particularly Perkins, which has really historically been focused at our issues. We saw the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act finally make its way to the president's desk. Perkins is up for reauthorization. Lot of optimism that we would see the 114th reauthorize Perkins. So we finished the first year of the 114th. Let me stop and ask you, what did you guys see in this first year, the 114th, for Perkins, for your area of education?
Sure. So, as you said, 2015 was jam-packed with education and workforce activity on Capitol Hill, which isn't always the case, as you very well know. So we were very excited to start the year off with some, proposed WIOA regulations, which, gave us some insight into how the federal departments are planning to implement the new law. We definitely see a lot of opportunities for CTE programs, both at the state and the local level, to engage with the workforce system through that. So we're very excited, to be part of the implementation process moving forward. On top of that, though, we've really spent most of 2015 reauthorizing No Child Left Behind, or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And so that process, began very early on in January in both the House and the Senate, who passed respective sort of proposals for reauthorization and worked their way through, all of the different processes on the Hill throughout the year. And we finally got a bill late this past year, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or sometimes as I refer to it as ESSA. So, but we were very pleased to see a lot of good CTE-related provisions in that law. And so moving forward, particularly with implementation for that law, we're really looking forward to leveraging those points of opportunity in the future. So that's really what we're working on right now. So,
do you see the conversation, Steve? You mentioned the discussion around the WIOA.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see some of the elements of that conversation carrying on into what you're working on with Perkins? We did see the reauthorization of ESEA. I mean, do you think there's some momentum in Congress to get, I don't want to say get through, but to get past these reauthorization issues with all the education bills?
I think there is a lot of appetite in Congress right now to clear the deck, so to speak, when it comes to education and workforce. And I think that from the workforce perspective, you guys are really well suited because we started that whole process with WIOA. And because of that, everything that's led afterwards is going to have sort of a workforce development flavor to it, right? And so there is an immense amount of interest in reauthorizing the Higher Education Act in this last half of the 114th Congress. But that said, lawmakers are very interested in Perkins reauthorization as well. And so we'll be competing, with that right now. I would say that it seems to be a pretty heavy lift in a presidential election year. So the chances of Perkins sort of moving in one or both chambers are slightly higher than they would probably in years past. But I would say that the window of opportunity for Perkins reauthorization is really around between January and April of this year. So if we don't really see something comprehensive or big move through one or both chambers, the odds of Perkins reauthorization probably diminish pretty quickly as the year sort of continues on, and the conversations bleed more into presidential politics rather than legislation. So
let me step back a little bit, and then we'll come to last night to the president's address. We got an omnibus, the collective we, not saying we did it, you and I did it. But
high fives.
But we saw an omnibus budget bill. Mm-hmm. I know that in any piece of legislation, you're not happy with the whole thing, but were you guys relatively happy with what happened in the funding?
Yeah, I think that the key message from congressional appropriators this year was that if you're getting a reauthorization, you might also get a bump in funding as well. And so we saw that play out in the funding landscape, in FY16 this year. Perkins has maintained funding I would say pretty well in the past 3 years or so. Following the massive sort of cuts from sequestration in 2013, we were very successful in restoring 96% of those cuts We've been protecting them ever since. And so really, when we look at sort of the appropriations process moving forward, I think that a conversation on increases for the Perkins Act, particularly from the funding side of things, are really going to sort of materialize when Perkins reauthorization picks up pace as well.
So anything in the State of the Union address that caught your ear last night or caught your eye this morning as I think all of Washington was downloading the actual text and reading through it.
What jumped out for me really was the president's renewed call for America's College Promise, the 2 years of community college for free, tuition free, I should say, for eligible students. That's something we're very interested in. As we know, increasingly more jobs in this country are requiring some form of post-secondary education or training above and beyond a high school diploma. So any form of post-secondary sort of preparation is going to be increasingly important in this evolving economy. And so that's really what we're interested in moving forward and working with the administration on this year. In addition to that, we really appreciated his call outs for some of the sort of applied learning approaches to academics, right? So he was talking about mathematics and computer science and coding, during his address last night, particularly with an eye towards preparing students for real world experiences. And so, a mention like that is just, music to our ears. So we were very happy to hear that.
Yeah, I was happy this morning as I was going through there to see the recognition by the president that this whole notion of job loss, job creation, that there was a lot of churn happening in the market, and that was something that we needed to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So it's New Year's. We all make resolutions. I'm going to lose weight. What do you want to see in a New Year's resolution for 2016, the second half of the 114th?
Well, as our bread and butter legislation, we would definitely love to see, something put out on Perkins this year. So we're definitely working towards that process to see something substantial and thoughtful be introduced in either the Senate or the House this year on Perkins reauthorization. So that will definitely be our number one policy wish list of 2016. But in addition to that, I think that really with the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, that's going to provide a lot of opportunities for the CTE community in the coming few years, particularly with some of the new opportunities in the law with regards to the well-rounded education definition that was incorporated there.
Tell us about that definition.
Sure. So this is a definition that now replaces the old sort of terminology of core academic subjects.
Okay.
It includes a number of quote-unquote non-academic coursework or subjects in this definition, and is used throughout the law as sort of a point of emphasis. So moving forward, every student is now expected to have a well-rounded education. And as part of that well-rounded education, career technical education is part of that mix now. And so we're very much looking forward to looking at how to leverage that opportunity in the states and the local communities where that work's going to be ongoing.
So both of us are looking to the Department of Education and the Department of Labor for some regulatory language to help explain some things from Capitol Hill.
It remains to be seen what type of regulation and what level of regulation the departments are going to put out on ESSA this year. I mean, I think one of the defining sort of themes of that legislation is really a rollback of the federal role in K-12 education, and that was made pretty explicit throughout the statute. So it'll be interesting to see what the departments ultimately decide to put out in terms of rules. I know right now there is a call for input from the community as to what they should be regulating. So to telegraph a little bit, that's definitely something that we're trying to put on their radar. So we're very much looking forward to that. But in the same sort of breath, though, in terms of regulations, we are looking forward to the final rules for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which are due out at the end of the month. So. As states are finalizing their state plans for WIOA, we're hoping that we'll see some final rules soon that can help guide that process across the finish line. And so, that's really what we're looking for right now. I think the other big piece to all of this is going to be a conversation on career readiness, and really trying to wrap our arms around what career readiness looks like and how to incentivize it both at the secondary and post-secondary learner levels. And we really want to make sure that with the new legislation that's now being implemented in the states and new legislation that's being considered, such as Perkins, that we have a good understanding of what career readiness should look like, and also how to hold programs, states, and local communities accountable for student readiness into the workplace.
Steve, is the National Association of the state directors, the state plans for the INO, as I call it, the state plans are now getting published. People are getting to public comment. They're going to be rolling into the Department of Labor. So you guys talk to your members. Was there, I don't know how you measure a lot, but there was involvement from the career and tech community in the state plans? Is that something you saw? Is that something different than you've seen in the past?
Yeah, we've definitely seen a concerted effort in our membership to engage with the workforce systems throughout the states, particularly in the development of state plans. As you know, Perkins is an optional partner program at the state level for inclusion in a combined state plan. And so right now we think about 5 to 6 states are considering or have done a combined state plan to include Perkins in that. But in lieu of that, that's not to say that, WIOA planning and implementation without a formal inclusion of Perkins is going to leave CTE out of that conversation, particularly with all of the planning requirements and the sort of introspective sort of analysis that has to take place in the state level. CTE has got to be part of that conversation, and that's something that our members have really sort of embraced this past year, and we're really looking forward to seeing some final plans so we can read through them.
Oh, Steve, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. It's always great to hang out. We get to have coffee from time to time, and through the Committee for Education Funding. I think I'm really encouraged by the work that CEF does, and by our now being a part of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you've been listening to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards from Washington, D.C. My guest has been Steve Voytek, who is the Government Relations Manager for the National Association of State Directors of Career Technical Education Consortium. I'm your host, Ron Painter, and we'll hopefully catch up with you soon on another edition of Workforce Central.